All right, folks, how's everybody doing? Thanks for joining us. My name is Todd Richards.
And I'm Darko Vukovic.
And we are part of the County Freedom Coalition. And in this podcast, we are interviewing people who are trying to advance liberty and freedom in the state of Colorado. And today we are joined by Ty Winter. How you doing, sir?
Doing very well. Thank you, gentlemen, for having me on this evening.
You bet. And you're running for District 47, correct?
Yes, sir. So it's 9 counties in the southeastern corner of Colorado. It's 7 full and 2 partial. So that includes the 2 partial counties are Huerfano County and Pueblo County, and the full counties are Los Animas, Crowley, Kiowa, Bent, Baca, Prowers, and Otero.
All right. So you're down at the far bottom southern part of the state there. You back up to New Mexico then, correct?
Yes, sir. I live very close to New Mexico. I live about 8 miles north of Trinidad, Colorado, on a 4th generation farm and ranch. So I'm about a 15-minute drive to the New Mexico border.
All right. Yeah. So 4th generation, you're born and raised in Colorado?
Yes, sir. Born and raised in the district, 4th generation farm and ranch family on one side. And then on the other side, small towns, we do everything. We're 3rd generation funeral directors on my mom's side of my family.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Busy getting into you got to one side of the family business or the other, huh?
Right. Yeah. So my day job most of the time is funeral directing right now. With the drought and everything that's happened here, it's been hard on the ranching and farming industry. My brother does a little bit more of that. He's actually went to driving a truck part-time as well, because between, like I said, the drought, a lot of the regulation we see, inflation and gas prices, it makes it hard for small farms and ranches to survive today. So we're just trying to keep things going.
All right. Well, that kind of leads into one of the questions I've asked some of the folks that are running in those rural communities. Do you believe the rural-urban divide is real?
Oh, definitely. The issue I have, gentlemen, is my platform, that's one of the things on my platform, is defending agriculture and agricultural producers. Right now, we definitely have a governor who says that he cares for his rural cousins, but then he has things such as meat out days, where he basically ended up, in all reality, being one of the best meat salesmen in the state of Colorado for that day, because I think more meat was sold on that day probably in the history of the state of Colorado. But, the actions speak louder than words. And then he appoints Alan Kessler to the veterinary board, who has made numerous disparaging comments about 4-H and FFA kids and the way they treat their livestock, which, my children are in both 4-H and FFA, and they're definitely very good to their animals. She made a very horrendous comment that farmers and ranchers are lazy, nasty people that only raise beef so they can bait wolves. So the state has to pay for the beef because nobody wants to pay for the beef, which is a horrible comment, which she actually ended up resigning right after she made that comment. And then come to find out, she received some type of animal cruelty charges because they found some birds in cages in her basement in her apartment. So stuff like that. Then Bureau of Animal Protection, what that's going to end up going to be. And, they tried to pass the PAWS Act. I've heard that there's going to be legislation try to be run through this year, which is, egregious animal welfare that, like I said, farmers and ranchers are stewards of the land, and they take very good care of their animals in the land. So defending agriculture is huge for me. And like I said, actions speak louder than words. First husband had also made comments over the prairie dog issue. And, basically that farmers and ranchers in rural Colorado shouldn't bite the hand that feeds them. So I definitely think that they know that we're a huge part of the economy, and that rural Colorado and our heritage is strong. But I also believe there's definitely a disdain for rural Colorado. And when elected, that's going to be one of my big things, is I think that we need to really push the legislators that legislate in the Metroplex out of their vacuum and let them see how the bills that they pass affect people that don't live in their district. So definitely fighting for rural Colorado is one of the key reasons I'm running and brought me into this race. And there definitely is a divide, whether they say so or not. I think it's just speak for them. It sounds good that they say there isn't a divide, but their actions definitely do different.
Right.
How much is that? A cultural divide versus simply, hey, we think what you're doing is bad for the environment, and that's the qualms we're having with it. Kind of, if you had to get in their mind, what would you say is the root cause of the disdain that they have towards the rural community?
Well, first of all, I don't think that they know how we live our lives. I don't think that they have any idea I'm going to be honest, gentlemen, it takes tough people to live in rural Colorado. I mean, people don't live 3 minutes from the store. And when the power goes out, the power might be out for a few days. It's a different type of living. And I think part of it is non-education, not knowing what it's like to live out here. And then I do think that there's there's always that thing about country people, and I think that there is that gap. I would venture to say that I think that they try to push the whole green idea and that rural Colorado affects that. But I think that's another reason that I'm running is there's no truth in politics anymore. It's feelings and ifs and wins and maybes. And I think that part of it is education. I talk to a lot of people on the campaign trail, and I do a lot of listening. And what's unfortunate about this is people in rural Colorado are working hard to feed America, put energy into the cities with our energy workers in rural Colorado. And they're hardworking blue collar workers, and they don't have time to educate people in the city about what we do. I've seen interviews where they ask kids in the inner city schools, where do your eggs come from? And they're like, King Soopers. Where does milk come from? The grocery store. So it's almost like people in rural Colorado, not only do they have to work in their communities, be on school boards, be involved in their kids' lives, raise livestock, grow crops, produce energy, but now it's almost like we have to educate and promote ourselves. And that's a really tall task to do. So I think that some of the divide that they claim is partially they don't want to know how we live our lives. And I think somewhat that they kind of, brush us to the side. And I will say that we have been trying to do a better job of letting people know what we do in rural Colorado and how we live our lives. I think another issue that they have with is we just want to be left alone. And big government don't like people being left alone. They want to push and sway and corral. And rural people, we still live on the frontier. No matter how cliche that may sound, we just want to wake up, raise our kids, go to church, work hard, and have limited government. And I don't think the whole idea behind the limited government goes over well with them. So I would have to say that that's, kind of my view on it, and the view that I've picked up by listening to people in rural Colorado.
Very, very seems to be a common theme with the folks that live out in rural Colorado, that they just want to be left alone and do their own thing, do what they like to do what they love to do.
We don't mind putting into society. We don't mind playing our part, but we, like you said, we want to, we want to just be left to live our lives in the most productive, conducive way for us. And that's, sometimes that butts heads with their agenda. And we're strong and we're stubborn and we're not going to cave.
Yep.
So Ty, you mentioned it's a fourth generation farm. So how many years would that add up to?
Okay, so it would have been my great grandfather bought the first homestead on the place. So, my grandfather lived until he was 95, and his dad lived. So we're probably talking over probably close to 200 years, I would guess.
Wow.
Well, maybe not 200, maybe 150 years. That kind of put me on the spot to think about it, but definitely goes back to my great grandfather.
Yeah, so it's interesting that the thought process I'm having is I would bet that your land is still mostly, ground cover, mostly still in its natural state with maybe animals grazing on it. Is that a fair description?
Oh yeah, for sure. And one thing is we've always done improvements to our land. We've worked on building lakes and stock ponds, and that's where I get the whole idea of them trying to control people. I mean, people in rural Colorado, you're one with the land. You are the best steward for the land. You want your grass to grow. I mean, actually, they talk about the environment. I think that we're actually some of the best environmentalists there are. We want the grass to grow. We don't want waterways to turn into arroyos. We want to be able to collect the water. I mean, we have, the Colorado's wildlife lives on our property. So yeah, you're exactly correct. This land is pristine, beautiful land. We've got, we have land that is not only prairie land, but we also have farmland as well. So, definitely it's pristine, beautiful country that, isn't littered with trash, doesn't have needles on it. Things you like to see when you get into the city, doesn't have homeless people defecating on it. It's actually really beautiful, and we try to keep it that way.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because it actually kind of describes what I would argue is like a progressive utopia, is a lot of people living in that type of an environment. And yet somehow you guys become the targets of their attacks. Whereas if I went to, blue districts and looked at what those looked like 200 years ago versus what they look like now, I bet it'd be quite the difference from your property.
The concrete jungle.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think somehow gosh, I keep wanting to go to intentional narrative, but I also like pull myself back to say, okay, like don't just assume the worst in people. But I think there's this misconception where you take the worst of mining, farming practices from like the 1800s and you project it as if that's what's going on today. It's, it's the I forget the book. I think about the meat factories and the book about blast mining and things of that sort. And it's like we still somehow have that narrative pushed today. Yeah, the jungle. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Sinclair, I believe. Yeah. So it's like we want to paint that picture on today's practices instead of saying, hey, maybe there's still some legacy that should be reformed and improved, but it's not simply being a farmer that's the problem. It's within a discipline, you have a spectrum of abuse and good stewardship. And, grouping it all together is just not helping anyone.
And that's how we get here. I mean, mistakes have to be made to improve in life. And you brought about mining, and I want to hop into energy really quick. And this is where I talk everywhere with everybody. So I've had conversations. It was kind of crazy. So the state of Colorado had like a climate change clinic here at the local high school. And 3 of us signed up to go, and we show up and there's like 12 state employees in like 9 cars from the state. So they're really taking care of the environment there, driving 9 cars down. And one of the questions I asked them was about the scrubbers on coal-fired plants and such. And the issue I have is we live in a state where Pueblos they're in my district. So CF&I, which was the steel plant, and we're a big coal mining community, actually. That's how this community started. It was huge coal mining. And the issue I have is like China's putting on a coal-fired power plant like once a month. We have India throwing coal-fired power plants on nonstop. And I was actually having a conversation. I'm like, so we're sending blue-collar jobs overseas, and we're mining our coal, sending it overseas. We're sending all of our toil and hard work overseas to countries that care nothing about the environment, and we could do it better in the United States and employ our own people and keep our wealth here. And that's what totally drives me insane about this narrative. I mean, you look at what's happening, and I mean, I know I'm running for office in Colorado, but if you look at geopolitically what's happening in Russia, we could be supplying Europe with all the natural gas that they need. We would put Americans to work. We would be producing and exporting a commodity and making money while feeding our own people. And it's that whole, well, out of sight, out of mind. Well, I don't have to see that coal-fired power plant, even though the scrubber does way better. And it's better for the environment. And it's just crazy. Like I said, goes back to the whole reason I'm running to is truth. There's no truth in politics anymore. It's feelings. Well, that coal-fired power plant's ugly. And I only could imagine that it's pumping out all of this in the atmosphere. But I don't care if it's happening in China. And it just blows my mind. So, you're correct. Same with farming practices. I can't remember where I just read an article, and you could correct me, that now they're talking about doing the carbon tax for cow flatulence overseas. I'm not sure what country I read. And I know that they've talked about that in the United States of America, the carbon footprint that ranchers and farmers put on. And then on the other hand, you get a wildfire because we don't maintain our forests. And in the first 3 days of a massive wildfire, it puts way more pollution into the air than I think they said that cars running 24 hours a day in the state of Colorado for a year does. So it's just the whole one side, the other, flip-flopping and not looking at truth and only pushing an agenda. And that's the issue I have, is we have an agenda. We can't stray from the agenda, even if truth overrides feelings.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I saw an article, it was a study by reputable universities where California's wildfires just this last season offset the entirety of their savings from all the reductions they did across all their green initiatives for the last 2 decades. So you have situations like that where, to your point, it just doesn't add up. And I think, you look at Brazil destroying the Amazon so that you can grow cattle, so that you can then ship that cattle to the US so that we can eat it instead of us growing our own cattle. It just, things like that don't make sense. Or China producing steel, or Nigeria pulling oil. And it's like the out of sight, out of mind piece of it has to go away. And I think it comes from the NIMBY, which, a lot of people are NIMBY. It's not a left or right issue, but I think it's more so the left that tends to just say, hey, as long as it's not happening within my jurisdiction, I don't really care what impact it truly has on the planet.
And they control the narrative, and that's what makes it hard. They control the media. They control the game from day one, and then they control our youth. They feed our youth BS, a lot of it. I mean, Republicans or conservatives, they don't care about the environment, and that is not true. And that's the issue that I have. It's just, we don't care. If we don't follow lockstep in their dogma, then we're wrong. And that's the issue I have too, is they control so much of the information, and it's hard to push back against big money. And when they control the media, it's hard to push back. And that's why we need an involved citizenry. I mean, it's going to be the old school town square, word of mouth, stuff like you guys are doing right here, getting the word out to people. Hopefully somebody comes across this and hops on here that don't believe the way I do or the way you do. And they're like, oh, wow, something they said struck a chord. So, we definitely have to work harder as conservative to win the hearts and minds. We really do.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the debate too. And sometimes we take positions that are not structured appropriately. So for example, I believe that burning coal is better than burning wood, and burning natural gas is better than burning coal, right? Like, it's okay to have that progression all the way to your top ideal. And in my case, my top ideal is solar panels, but just because it's better in one dimension of it doesn't mean it's better comprehensively in all circumstances. So, for me, it's like, well, I think it's better to burn our natural gas than to depend on Russian natural gas.
Right.
But I also think that tomorrow, if we have an opportunity to reduce energy consumption while maintaining our standard of living, we should try to, right? Like, so it's okay to have these pro-environmental views, instead of just being like, oh, because you believe this, I now have to take the opposite opinion. And so my message to conservatives is, don't do that. Just actually admit where there is a good ideal, but also be a realist and explain the realistic situation that causes you to believe something, rather than, getting caught in dogma.
No, you're 100% correct. And I tell people this all the time, like with the solar and wind, I'm not necessarily against solar and wind. I do think that we do need to throw up the positive and negatives about everything. I mean, we do need to talk about how many metric tons of coal it takes to create solar panels and wind turbines. Mm-hmm. We also need to talk about the footprint they leave, because it takes away from agricultural production. A solar field takes a lot of prairie land away, which comes into not only the effect on the environment and the animals around it, but raising cattle on it. Same. And then what happens with this stuff when it runs its life course? When the windmills broke down, when the solar panel's no good anymore, how do we dispose of it? I think those are things that need to be talked in that discussion, but I definitely don't see a problem with the harmony of everything. But it's like that old saying, and it's kind of, I think I understood what you said. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's like, we're going to draw this red line in the sand, and, like a kid, turn your head and go, na, 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 na. And that just doesn't work. We have to have those real conversations. But I do think we're seeing more of that. I don't know how you gentlemen feel, but I do think that people are restructuring their game plans. And I do see more conversation than just holding the line than when I got started 7 or 8 years ago. I believe I see that.
Yeah, me too. And I hope it continues. And, even with agriculture, it's like, what's really good? A piece of steak. What also is really good? Organic vegetables. Like, it's not like one or the other, it's like, so, and if somebody wants to be vegan, go ahead and be vegan, it's like, and if somebody just wants to be a carnivore, go ahead and be a carnivore. Like, we can look at the benefits of all of these things, and we can come to a conclusion that, actually a balanced diet that includes fiber and starch and protein, that's maybe something good for everybody.
Amen to that.
All right. Going on, just had a thought, is continuing on that power or energy stance. What do you think about nuclear power?
So actually, I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but I went through leadership program of the Rockies.
Okay.
Yeah, I went through that, and one of the things that they asked in there is to pick a stance. I will go on record saying I see no issue with nuclear power. Europe uses it to good effect. It's safe and reliable. And that's the issue I have with the other side is they want this safe and reliable power that don't leave this horrible footprint. But we can't look at nuclear power. And what's crazy is I mean, you take, I would say he was a progressive. You look at Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter really tried to push the nuclear power, and then it was 3 Mile, correct?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
That happened. Yeah, so that happened, which kind of put a crink in his plans. But I think that goes back to what you said about the dogma and drawing the line. I mean, here you're saying, well, we want to get away from these types of power, and then you have, and I know they tried to pass a bill, I think, out of the House. I can't remember if it was Woog or who it was that tried to do the package, nuclear plants. Yep. But we have something, and if it's done correctly and it's done safely, and we don't cut any corners, I think nuclear is a good option. I think that with the technology that would be used, and we look at what Europe has done with it, I think that it would be foolish not to dabble in it and at least take a good, strong look at it. I really do.
Yep. Yeah, it's I think France runs completely almost all on nuclear power. And if those crazy French people can do it, why can't we do it? So
actually, I do want to say something since you brought up France, if you don't mind me interjecting. So we have a coal mine actually in production right now in Los Animas County. It's called New Elk Coal. And we have some of the best metallurgical coal in the United States of America. They were actually mining that coal. They were shipping it via train to Alabama, and then they were mixing it with a coal from West Virginia and then putting it on barges and sending it to China, India, and Australia. Actually, since the whole Nord Stream and everything's happened, they've switched their coal mining to more geothermal coal, and they're actually shipping coal to France because France is kicking on some of its coal-fired power plants based on what's happening with those geopolitics. So, yeah, I mean, I just had to interject that because that's a little bit of local stuff for you guys to chew on. But no, definitely, I mean, they have it down pretty pat, and we haven't heard of any massive nuclear incident that I can think of in quite some time, other than what happened in Russia recently. Was it in Ukraine when they were worried about that power plant being hit by the Russians? I think it was.
Yeah. So as long as we're not, bombing artillery shells at the nuclear facility, we should be okay.
Right. So I mean, yeah, no, I definitely think it's something to look at. But
there are also certain things like fault lines. Like I'm sympathetic to the idea that the West Coast is maybe not good for nuclear. I mean, look at what happened with Fukushima in Japan. So seismic fault lines close to volcanoes. There are certain places where you shouldn't build nuclear, but other than that, I don't see an objection.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's good stuff. So how would you define compromise, and is there any room for compromise when a citizen's constitutional rights are at stake?
Those constitutional rights are inalienable, God-given rights. And the founders, when they wrote that document, they know exactly what they were saying. They knew exactly what they meant. And those rights are carved in stone. And that's all I have to say about that. Those rights are there. Those are our enumerated rights, and they're backed up by documentation. And, gentlemen, the founding fathers were some of the bravest, smartest men probably in the history of this world. And that document they created still rings true over 200 years later. And I think that they were very well thought out. And if you look at history, they still apply. That's what I don't like, is when people say, well, times have changed and they were written a long time ago. Those rights still apply, I think, not only to Americans, but I think that a lot of people around the world would love to live under those same rights that we have and we're blessed with.
Yep.
Yeah, and I like to remind people that the U.S. is the longest standing continuous form of government on the planet, and we're actually one of the quote unquote newer countries on the planet. So even these countries that claim they have a much longer history than we do, sure, in terms of maybe a culture, but in terms of a stable form of government, they can't make that claim. They've actually revolved a number of times since.
Correct. And that's another thing that drives me crazy is we've seen the shift to saying the word democracy. We're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. Democracy is mob rule, and we were not built for mob rule. Checks and balances, definitely.
Yeah,
Yep.
my biggest pet peeve is when people start talking about interpreting the Constitution. I'm like, what is there to interpret? It's written in plain language. You don't need to be a scholar to read the Constitution. It's a very short document. It's plain English. Everybody can understand it. And
Shall not be infringed doesn't mean anything other than
yeah,
shall not be infringed.
And the other thing is that the amendments to the Constitution, you're welcome to change it if you don't like some aspect about it. They built in a framework to changing it. And the people that gripe about it being an old document and why are we living with the document from 200 years ago, it's like, well, you're welcome to change it, but guess what? You're going to need a huge, I think is it 66% or no, 70%?
Thirds, I'm pretty sure.
Two-thirds.
Yeah, it's 36 states have to ratify.
Okay, yeah. So
amendment.
you need to get 2/3 of the states to agree to a change. And if you don't have that level of consensus that something's wrong about it, as has been shown many times through history, then I'm sorry, you don't get to change it. And go build up more support, and then you're welcome to change it. You can legally repeal the Second Amendment if you wanted to with the Constitution. There's a framework to do it, but you have to get 2/3 of the country to agree.
Yep,
correct.
Yep.
Curious. I have a question for you, Ty, here, and this is maybe a little bit off topic, but one thing that struck me is I believe there was an amendment passed to ban alcohol, and then there was another amendment to undo that amendment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So curious what you guys think about the fact that how is it that alcohol was held to such a high bar, but so many other things by the government are just banned willy-nilly, no need for a constitutional amendment, and we're just going to go ahead and set laws on you, and you're just going to have to deal with them.
Well, I think I think that has to do a lot with civics being taught, and I hope I'm taking this question the way you meant it. I know the example you're giving, and I think that what you see as litmus tests by people in government and people in power or people with agendas. And I think that has to go back with the old American spirit. And I think that we're seeing that trying to actually be snuffed out. The talk of civics, and you look at the Roe discussion. I mean, people don't understand federalism. They don't understand state rights. They don't understand that the United States of America, every own state is basically its own little country. So I think to answer that question is I think that by dumbing down a citizenry and not educating a citizenry, they're more apt to just step back and allow things like that to happen, basically because they're not educated on what their rights are and what abilities they have and what power, by the people for the people. And I just think that they don't understand how much power they actually have. And government is government. Am I anti-government? No, I'm limited government, just like the founders were. We know that there's a place for government in a civilized society. I'm not saying there isn't, but it's limited government. And I think that government, in some cases, doesn't nefariously try to overreach their bounds. But I think when you throw man into government, then those bounds can be overreached. So to answer your question, I think that they litmus test things and they see how far they can push things. I think we saw that with COVID. When it comes to shutting down businesses and forcing people from their jobs. And now we're starting to see a lot of reversal of that. I think the New York Supreme Court just yesterday said that they had to hire a bunch of workers back and back pay them for taking their jobs. So to answer that question, I think that, there's people that are going to use the levers of government to try to create change on people that they don't want. But I think that's also a good example of where if people stand up and stand for their beliefs and what's right and use those same levers of government, they can change it back, because that's why our government was set up the way it was, to push back against oppression by the government to the people. Sorry, I hope that's how I took the question.
No, yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just sitting here thinking how many things pertaining to firearms, how many things pertaining to energy, how many things pertaining to farming. Like there's so many things just that get banned either by executive order or even by the legislators. And yet we have this glaring example of banning alcohol that required a constitutional amendment. And so I just get left wondering, how is it that all these other things don't require that same standard?
Correct.
Yep. That's a good That's a thought for discussion at another time. That's a big one all by itself.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
could do an hour or two just on that.
just on why just on that one. So that's a hmm hmm hmm. Um, if an executive of a higher authority, say the governor, president, declares personal rights, such as, and this is all coming out of COVID, to operate a business, use services, or evict a non-paying tenants. Oh, that didn't come out right. If an executive of a higher authority declares personal rights are to be temporarily suspended due to a public emergency, what would you do in your role above and beyond voting, protesting, or expressing opinion to reject that executive action?
Well, I think the power is with the people. And I definitely think that, above my role would be that education factor that we were talking about. It would have to be out getting to people, teaching constitutional classes, teaching them actually what their rights are. We did see that during the COVID pandemic. There was some very egregious things done to our rights during COVID. And there were a lot of people that pushed back and fought against them. I mean, I will not say, but there were a whole lot more people that just went along to get along. And it was kind of disheartening in a way. And I mean, nobody wants to see anybody get sick and die. I'm not saying that. I mean, on the human level, I mean, COVID was definitely real and people definitely died from COVID. But the one size fits all issue is what I have, and the local control issue is what I have. I mean, what's good for Denver Metro may not be good for Pueblo or Trinidad or Lamar or La Junta. So I mean, I think it's definitely has to come with educating a citizenry, and then it's also happened to do with engagement of the citizenry. I think that's another thing is Americans don't do like they used to is they have to realize that this is an all-around thing. As a citizen, part of your duty as a citizen is to be engaged in politics, to be engaged in civic discussion, to be able to air your grievances in a nonviolent way. And I think that that's something we have to do is engage our citizenry more. And that comes to, I think, making sure that we work hard at the school board level to make sure that our kids are taught civics and taught these things. So I think that, I mean, I know that's a whole crazy answer for that question, but I think it's the engagement of the citizenry. I mean, that old saying, the nail that stands up gets hammered. Well, if you've got a million nails standing up, it's a heck of a lot harder to hammer all those nails. And I did see people. I mean, you saw people in the Denver Metro. They lost their businesses. They were shut down because they would not close. They took their liquor license. They used the levers of government as much as they could to shut these people down. And you had some people that just weren't willing to cave on some of this stuff. And if more people would have done it, if it would have went, 1 to 100 to 1,000, and then at some point, when you realize that people aren't going to do it, and it's just getting those citizens, and it's hard because people's lives are on the line, and they're, you lose your business, you lose your home, there's so much in line, but sometimes freedom takes cost. Look what our founding fathers had to give up. People look at the founding fathers and they see the pictures of Jefferson and, Adams and all these gentlemen, but they don't see the ones that, lost their farms, or the ones that were tarred and feathered or split and quartered, the men that fought for freedom. And, that's something as Americans we have to realize is it's okay to stand up. And as a community, if we work together as Americans, say you fought to keep your restaurant open and something happened, as Americans, you as their next door neighbor should say, okay, well, here's some eggs. And another next door neighbor says, well, here's some flour and here's some money for gas. Because at the end of the day, as Americans, we should be self-reliant and support those people for standing up and willing to make that risk. And I think that what we need to do as Americans is we need to educate ourselves, let people know their rights, and stick together. And I think that that's probably the best course for us. Is there's definitely ways to prove your point and stand your ground. And I think that one of it isn't being shamed. And I think a lot of people were shamed for their stances, and that's very unfortunate as well. I think people should have never been shamed for taking a stand or wanting to do what they thought was right. So I think it's giving Americans support, being self-reliant, educating the citizens and our children about what our rights actually are and where we can stand our ground and do it the correct way.
Would you be willing to organize protests at the Capitol?
What do you mean? Actually, so I've been to numerous events at the state capitol. We actually put on a freedom, would have been, I think, in 2017. We actually put on a freedom, and that had to do with when big tech was shutting down podcasts such as this. We actually did that against big tech. We went and we actually had a protest on the west steps at the state capitol, claiming that they were trying to shut down conservative voices or anybody that went against their narratives. So yes, I definitely was part of those. When COVID happened, here locally, I was the chairman of the local Republican Party, and we did flag waving drives. So, they had everybody locked down. We'd hop in the trucks, we'd all wave our American flags, and then we would all go to a restaurant and we would order, because you couldn't dine in, but we would all sit outside and eat on the tailgates with each other. So, definitely, airing your grievances in a peaceful manner, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's part of what America is about. Now, do I agree with burning down cities and breaking into buildings and physically assaulting people? No, I'm against all of that, because that goes against their rights as American citizens. But I do think airing your grievances and peacefully assembling and exerting your rights as an American, I'm 100% for that.
What's your view on getting personally arrested for a law or executive order that you think is unconstitutional?
I think that there's people that do that a lot to prove points. The way I look at it is if some people look at it as it's a bold statement, and I think it could actually cut your resources, because if you're in the clink and you have to come up with bail money and you can't be out there throwing your message out, I personally think that I myself would do better out of jail. I think it's kind of counterproductive to be in jail. I would much rather be out, wanting to be out and getting my voice out there and organizing citizens and getting the message out. So I do see where at times, people have definitely used it, but personally, I think more could be done not being arrested personally. There are some people that may be for it. Me, I think that I could get a lot more done on the street, actually, street preaching about the issue that we have, and, the whole process of getting arrested, getting bailed out, having to go to court. And then it takes time, money, and resources as well that you could be using on, your objective.
Yeah, there was a really good video. I remember when COVID came out, and there was a police officer out of Seattle. I believe he was like district or port authority or something like that. I don't know if you guys saw that video, but he was basically just, vehemently opposed to the idea of enforcing these laws. And one thing that he said is that, he served as a army member in Iraq, and he says that he's seen people's authority get just shredded by the populace when they just all of a sudden they don't look at you as a police officer anymore. They just look at you as a man with a badge and a gun, and your police officer status no longer matters to the group. And he says that that's extremely dangerous situation. So I do wonder to what degree there's an opportunity by, let's say, members of our state house to, next time the governor comes out with an executive order that's unconstitutional, to just say, hey, here we are. We're all going to break your order day one together as a group. And if you want to arrest half of your, state house, go ahead. Like, let us be the first ones to deal with your order. Because I think it would just diminish the authority a lot by showing them that there's people immediately ready to go and they're not afraid, and they're the elected representatives of the state.
Actually, that's a great example. And that to me I took it a little bit different than the original question. I actually think that's, a great example of protest. I mean, look at, you guys are in Weld County. I mean, look at your sheriff, Steve Reams. He basically got on 60 Minutes and said, if they're going to come after me on the red flag, I'll be put in my own jail. I know that there's constitutional sheriffs all over the state of Colorado that said that as well.
Yeah, and unifying that message, like what if it was one shared letter signed by 40 sheriffs versus each of them having to like kind of pop up on their own and worry about if there's even a group behind them.
Right. And I do know I've talked to, being on the campaign trail, a lot of House reps that, when the mask mandate, was on at the Capitol and, there was talks of a shot mandate at the Capitol, a lot of them just would not comply. They, it was a lot harder, they said, on their aides and staffers because they fall under a little bit different of they don't have, I guess, as much sway in the Capitol. But I know a lot of them that I've spoke to, they definitely, weren't going to comply with the mask mandates, or if there would have been a vaccine mandate, to legislate from the Capitol.
Yeah, and having that structure set up ahead of time, because you don't want to get caught off guard when the executive order hits and now you're scrambling to address it, right? Versus if you guys already have a network of people that are already, on the same page, then you have that ability to coordinate right out of the gate and take a shared message. And I think that's just really powerful.
Great example.
That's good. That is a good one. I like that idea. All right. So what would, you're out there campaigning, here's a chance to get more people, get that message out. What's your big message on why you're running? What's your I guess your 3, maybe 4 big top things that you are trying to push to get elected?
So how I really got involved in all of this is about, I would say, 10 years ago, a little bit longer than that ago. I was having coffee with some, railroaders, retired railroaders, ranchers, and farmers. Like most young guys, I was complaining about everything that was happening locally, politically. And one of them literally looked at me and he's like, "So you're going to keep complaining or actually do something about it?" And that like punched me right in the face. So from that point forward, I mean, I've served on numerous boards and committees, fire protection districts, school board, water board, fair board, farm bureau, chamber of commerce. There's a few more that's in that list. So, I got civically involved and active that way. So jumped into party politics, became the chairman of my local Republican Party, the chairman of House District 64. I was on the state executive committee, done a ton of that. Well, so when this seat popped open, I mean, I just couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore and watch what was happening to rural Colorado. So, I decided to, jump in with both feet. So I started traveling the district and listening to people. And I guess that's how you should really build a platform. I mean, I had ideas of what I wanted to do. So we talked about agriculture, but first and foremost on my platform is crime. It doesn't matter if you live in Denver, Pueblo, or Walsh, Colorado, there's crime everywhere. And I think that, that's a huge issue that we have to face. And basically the governor and the Democrats, through legislation, have decriminalized crime in the state of Colorado. I think what we need to do is we need to address those issues. We need to back the blue. We need to have truth in sentencing, and we need to make criminals criminals again in the state of Colorado. And, once I'm elected, my voice will be loud and clear from the state capitol. If you commit a crime, you're going to be punished. We talked about agriculture. You guys know my stance on that. I'm going to fight for ag. But then after that, it's, on my platform, constitutional rights and personal freedoms, First Amendment right. They kept us out of, our churches to worship God. Anytime anybody questioned anything with COVID, you were either silenced by your friends, neighbors, or media. Another attack on the First Amendment. So we can never allow that to happen again as American citizens. Then the Second Amendment, trying to take, our ability for, to protect a free citizenry through firearms. And then I think when you talk about the red flag, people automatically think about the Second Amendment, but actually the most egregious attack is on the Fourth Amendment. And that's, the whole innocent till proven guilty. With, the red flag, you're guilty till proven innocent. And it's the burden of yourself to prove your innocence. So I think people really need to look at that. And then we have the Fifth and 14th Amendment, which have to do with protecting private property rights and water rights, which kind of fall in ag, but kind of fall in the Constitution. So I'm a huge private property rights guy. I mean, the founding fathers knew that private property was the cornerstone to true freedom in the United States of America. And then water rights. The Front Range talks about sustainable growth, but the thing that they keep hidden in the nasty closet that they have is the sustainable growth is on the back of agri-centered communities in rural Colorado. And I tell people everywhere I go, not only will it be a no, it'll be a hell no when they come to take our water. Food is a national security issue. We've seen it with the supply chain. We've seen it with what's going on in Ukraine. And we definitely don't need to be taking water away from the communities that's going to grow our food. Then we look at education and parental rights. I'm a huge proponent of school choice. I think that a parent should be able to take their tax dollars to the federal and state government and be able to use that in a voucher to put their child in the most conducive learning environment, not only for the child, but for the parents and the family. Your children go to school to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. They don't go to school to learn CRT, revisionist history, and radical sex education. And, I think there's nothing wrong with competition in education. This participation trophy has flowed over into everything. And I think in education, there's a stranglehold on education. And I think that, if that voucher is going to the school that is the best school, then what does the other schools have to do? They either pick up their game or they close their doors. And I think that competition in education would be good. And then parental rights. Parents should know what their kids are learning. They should have the ability to adjust what their kids are learning based upon their personal and religious beliefs. And when it comes to their kids' health choices, what's best for your kid, not big government. And I think, we do have parental rights now, but, I could see them coming under attack even more as government grows and wants to put constraints on parents. So that's basically, what my platform is. It's a true American platform. It's like we talked earlier. We'll be productive members of society. We'll get up, we'll go to work, we'll do our share fare for this society. We raise our kids to the best of our ability, but let us be free to do that. And it's pushing that message. And at the state capitol, I always say that in rural Colorado, we have a simple way of thinking. Now, I'm not saying we're simple, but we have a simple way of thinking. It's A to B. It's black and white. It isn't all this emotion in the middle. You give us a problem and we find the easiest way to fix it without all the BS in the middle. So I think taking that attitude to the state capitol and having more rural legislators, which I think we're going to see after redistricting, is going to be good for the state capitol, because you're going to have principled conservatives that are going to dig in their boot heels, and they're not going to be buffaloed or pushed over by a lot of the I feel this way and I feel that way. So that's pretty much in a nutshell I'm running. I want a safer, more productive Colorado that, what's the word I'm looking for? Where we can make prosper. Thank you. Sorry. It's been 20 guys. I'm at almost 25,000 miles on the road. I'm exhausted. Yeah. Sorry. Safer and more prosperous Colorado for our kids to grow up in. Right. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's what most people want. And if that's the message, I really liked the commitment to Colorado that the state GOP come out with, because if you look at that, who wouldn't want any of that for their children? So I think it's pushing that message that, we care about the environment. We care about your family. We care about education, all these nasty things that they're talking points that conservatives don't care about. And I think it's taking that and getting into these communities and letting people know, hey, here we are. This is what we believe in. Sit down and talk to us. Don't believe what you hear on TV or on the radio. And that's in a nutshell why I'm running. I just want a better Colorado for all of us, and just a good United States of America for all of us as well.
So a question on crime, then a question on education. Where do you think the crime problem is breaking down? So I kind of break it up into, there was all the events that led to the crime being committed. And then there's, once the crime is committed, it's too late to now go talk about the issues that caused it. Like, how do you address it and how do you deal with it? So in that second half of it, is it that, the police are not making the arrests? Is it that they lack the appropriate training and equipment to make the arrest? Is it that once the arrests are made, they're not being prosecuted, or that judges are dismissing the criminals or giving them too lenient of sentences, or that the incarceration system doesn't actually do anything to change that person, and so as soon as they come back out, they're right back at it? Where in that chain of events of post-crime are we failing society?
And not to, I want to talk about that, but I want to talk about pre-crime, because I think it has to do some of it mental health, drugs. I think it also has to do with the nuclear family, trying to get rid of God. I think that has an issue with it too. So there's a lot of things that I think that are creating these problems that we're having. Morals, values, ethics. I think we're losing a lot of that in society. So to jump into what you're talking about, I definitely believe that it's a little bit of everything you're talking about. I won't put it so much as on law enforcement. I think actually that they're trying to push law enforcement to do less law enforcing through their policies, through their tactics. I've been talking to police officers that are like, they've made it to where if we make contact with somebody, if it's a hello on the side of the street, it's 45 minutes worth of paperwork. Well, what does that do? That dissuades a police officer from doing his job, because at the end of the day, if he talks to 5 people, then he spends another couple of days in the office trying to write all these reports. So I think it has to do with legislation that's been passed. I mean, or some of the issues that we're facing, they have literally decriminalized crime. I spent a little bit of time at the Capitol this last spring, and they talk about crime of necessity. That's a new one I've heard, crime of necessity. And it's, fellas, you guys, your parents, you knew that, most people knew that if you did something wrong, you were going to be punished. And if your parents followed through with it, well, you probably weren't going to do it again because you'd been punished for it. And I think that there also is a way to help reform criminals and help them. I don't think that everybody wants to be career criminals. And I think that there's people that, there's a way you can help them, not the hand out, but the hand up, and get them on their feet. But I think it's a little bit mixture of everything that you talked about. I think it's the breakdown of society. Like I said, not as much responsibility with the nuclear family. And then I think that causes the problem that we see. And then, it's a little bit, I think it's the recipe. You basically outlined a recipe of disaster is what I guess I would call it. So I think it's something that we really need to focus on. I mean, in this state right now, I'm not saying anything. You guys were #1 in porch pirates, #1 in recreational cocaine use, #1 in bank robberies, #2 in fentanyl overdoses, #1 in auto theft. Well, that has to be sparked by something. And I think it's leniency on crime is probably the #1 thing that sparks it.
Yeah, no, and this is why I kind of tried to separate the two, because I think too often it's relatively easy to sympathize with every one of them and say, well, I bet there's something bad that happened to that person that led to them, committing that crime. And while that might be true, and those are genuine problems that we need to address, you can't separate that from the fact that, well, now that they have committed the crime, there has to still be the appropriate punishment, because otherwise what you're doing is you're just lowering the bar for future people to be incentivized to commit those crimes. And so it's hard to be both empathetic at the same time, but at the same time say, hey, I'm sorry, you got to serve time, because you can't just go around assaulting people because you're high on fentanyl and you didn't even know what you're doing, but you still did it.
Yeah, because if not, then you end up with anarchy, is what you end up with, basically the law of the jungle. In a civilized society, we can't allow that to happen.
On the education front, curious to get your thought around reforming versus dismantling the public school system. One concern, which I think has some merit to it, is that, okay, well, if everybody starts plucking their kids out of public school, at the end of the day, you're still going to have somebody left at that public school. And what shape is that going to leave the school system in? And what resourcing is going to leave that school system in? And are those kids that are left behind going to fall even further behind in that situation?
Well, and I get what you're saying about plucking the kids out of school, but you have parents that want to reform the education system, and then the DOJ, led by Merrick Garland, basically calls them domestic terrorists and puts them on FBI watch lists. So they want to dissuade you from reforming the education system. I think it was McGuffey in Virginia, was it, that said parents shouldn't have anything to say about what their kids learn in school. That's the job of the state. I'm pretty sure he said that in Virginia 2 years ago.
It was the guy who ran against the current governor. The name slips my mind too.
I think it was McGuffey, maybe. McGuffey or was it Northam? One of the two. So yeah, I mean, I think people want to do that. And I think people have the best intentions to go in and be like, okay, here's the deal. We can meet in the middle in education, and we can have a little bit for everybody. But they're dissuaded from that. So they do pull their kids out and they homeschool. I mean, my kids went to the school I went to, or my oldest daughter. And with all the COVID mandates, they now ride the bus 50 minutes each way to go to a little smaller farm school that's, not as stringent on stuff like that. So I think that parents and the citizenry want to be involved and engaged and active. But you see school boards that have, bashed them down. They don't let them speak. People are getting arrested. And then, like I said, they're put on watch lists for having an opinion. So I think out of that, you'll see the birth of more charter schools. I think you'll see the birth of more educational institutions that are more school choice, voucher type institutions, which I think is good, because at the end of the day, some things can't be fixed. I hate to say it, but some things can't be fixed. and change is good. And out of the fire is the rebirth. Out of the ashes sometimes is the rebirth. And I think that we're seeing, I guess, I don't know if this word renaissance in education. I do. I think that I hope that this all works out for the best, and I hope that we can find the middle ground. I think the federal Department of Education I think the states should run their own education. Each state knows what's best for them. I mean, I'm a local control guy, but I think people are making that effort. But I think it's one of those things is like we talked about the whole getting arrested thing. Well, I can beat my head against the wall forever, and I could do it and prove a point, but nothing's going to change. So I'm going to take a different play out of the playbook, and I'm going to create change by quit beating my head on the wall and using my energy, resources, time, and money to fix the problem in a different way if it can't be fixed.
So is it fair to say their position is that if possible, your preference would be to reform, but if it's too far gone, or if the group, whoever has the stranglehold on that district doesn't want involvement from parents, doesn't want that change, doesn't welcome new opinions and new beliefs, then it's better to actually preserve some kids' education than to have them all, go down the kitchen sink together.
And you hate to be that way, but I think that, you outlined, once you've exhausted every opportunity, chance, or way of putting your opinion out there to make a good, positive change. Yes, I think at some point, you have to abandon ship. You can't die on every hill.
Yeah, and that's a decision that I think could be made on a district basis, per district basis. And so it's not like I think you or I or anyone is advocating for the total dissolution of public schools in the state of Colorado. What you're saying is some districts, they might just suffer that fate from parents themselves deciding that it's too far gone.
Local control.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Any last words before we wrap this up?
I just want to thank you, gentlemen, for a productive conversation. I think that if we had more conversations like this on both sides of the aisle, I think we get a lot more done. I think that, everybody's kind of taken their ball and went home. And, even in politics, there's some places you have to draw the line and you can't move from the line, but there's other places that we can reach across the line and work together. And I don't think our founders ever expected that we would be one party rule, one party control, because the Republic don't work that way. I just hope that in this next session that the balance is a little bit more even. That way, it isn't just so one-sided, the stick hammering you down. And that's what I plan on doing. I plan on getting to the state capitol and working with my caucus to put good conservative values back to the citizenry, give them ideas and solutions to the problems that we're facing. One thing I say all the time is conservatives, one thing we can't do is overpromise and underdeliver. Now, I believe that in this term, we're going to be given a big chance to put our positions out there and our policies. And I think if we implement those correctly, we're going to be able to make a real change. And then hopefully we can open some eyes. And, I don't know if you guys remember Major League. Hey, those guys aren't so bad. I think that's, what we're looking at here. And, so many people I've met that are already going to be at the state house that are, we would call veterans. And then there's so many freshmen that are going to come in that I think that have that same belief system. And I really think we're going to be able to make a change, guys. And I appreciate you gentlemen doing this and stepping out there and getting the word out to people and being just honest and not trying to trap people or the I got you moments, and just having, honest conversations. And all I can say is, please, anybody that's watching this, educate your kids, get involved, let's help us create an active citizenry. I know raising kids and making money and all that's important, but preserving this great republic is our duty as American citizens. Just if anything, look at the veterans that have died so we could live in this great nation. And, we all can put a little bit in as Americans. And not everybody's going to run the trail you guys are running or run the trail I'm going to run, but there's a place for everybody. If it's forwarding a chain email that has to do with liberty and freedom, then you've done your part. So you don't have to give what you give or what I give, but everybody could give a little bit. So I guess that would be the final message I have is let's work together and, let's live up to the America that our founders wanted us to have. life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, freedom for everybody. And let's all work together to, you know, fix this state. The state needs some fixing.
All right. All righty. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for coming on with us and letting us get to talk to you about what you're running for, and it's just good to hear, you know, what you had to say. So it's
Well,
been
thank you, gentlemen, as well. And, you know, hopefully I get the chance to, you know, press flesh with you, gentlemen, and shake hands. And, you know, once I get up to the state capitol, you guys have my phone number. If you're ever in the area, get a hold of me, and, you know, maybe we'll go have dinner and we'll talk some more liberty and freedom.
Yeah,
There you go.
we'd love to have you back on. Also, once you're a state representative.
yeah.
That's
Once you
awesome,
have
for sure. That sounds like a date to me. So thank you, gentlemen, again, and I appreciate you all, and have a great evening.
Great.
yeah,
Thank you, Ty.
you too. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.